Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Progressive Christians Podcast. We are the love your neighbor kind of Christians and not the storm the Capitol kind. So, if you're curious about what a socially and politically progressive Christianity looks like, then this is the podcast for you. I want to remind you to please rate, review, share, and subscribe to us on whatever podcast platform you are using. My name is Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter, and I am your host of this weekly podcast, which features myself along with my friends and fellow progressive Christians, Julia, Wesley, and Blair. How's everybody doing tonight?
Hello.
Party.
Hey, happy to be here. I'm happy to be finally on the pod with Blair.
Oh, cool. All four of us.
Yeah, it's the first one.
Yeah, I know. We've all been, I think we've been traveling and we got more traveling coming up. So this might be the only one we have with the four of us until like November. Based on everybody's travel schedule, but we'll see. We got work to do, man. We're progressive.
Yeah.
We're activists. We out there.
We're on.
We don't just talk about it. We do
Exactly.
it.
We have stuff to do, man. We are active. I'm actually really excited about today's episode because it gets into some themes I was seeing when I was a professor at the University of San Diego. Really gonna dive into this article. It is in the New York Times that discussed why within Gen Z, men seem to be more religious than women and just where that's coming from and why that is the case. And then we're going to finish by talking about the man who calls himself the Black Nazi, Mark Robinson, the Lieutenant Governor of North Carolina, and just have a conversation around all the stuff that's going on with him, because there's a lot of stuff, including religion, because he is a person who's a preacher and has done a lot of campaigns in churches, and yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. So let's get to it. So this article was published in New York Times, I think a few days ago. It's by Ruth Graham. And it's titled, "In a First Among Christians, Young Men Are More Religious Than Young Women." And one of the key quotes in the article, it says, "For the first time in modern American history, young men are now more religious than their female peers. They attend services more often and are more likely to identify as religious." Specifically, she pointed out in the article that the men and women of Gen Z are also on divergent trajectories in almost every facet of life, including education, sexuality, and spirituality. So I guess before we dive into some specific topics as it relates to this article, I'm just really curious, just kind of what came up for you. I know, Wesley, you were the one who like kind of spotted this and, you know, kind of the genesis of our conversation.
Yeah.
Just kind of like what came up for you? I mean, I think you're the closest to you're not Gen Z, are you? I don't even know. No, you're a millennial,
not even
right?
close to Gen Z.
No, none of us on this podcast
Firmly.
are Gen Z.
Firmly a millennial.
Not even close.
We're talking about a generation we love, but we are not part of.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I am at the edge of X and millennial. Like I have identified with both because
Cusp.
of the, I'm at
He's
I'm
on
at
the
the cusp. So
Yeah.
I'm definitely not Gen Z. But anyway, so Wesley, what came up for you when you were reading this?
Yeah. So I mean, I think the reason that this caught my eye was because a lot of my understanding of a Gen Z is that it's a larger group of people who identify more as like on the LGBTQ spectrum. I think the article says something like 1/3 identify that way. And so like to then see an article that was talking about a growth in a specific community and specific religious communities that are coming from young men was like, oh, like I'm gonna go read this article and see what it's talking about. So I mean, there's a lot in this article that I wanted to discuss, and so that's why I submitted it. So it's just like, hey, I think this would be cool to talk about, just to see how largely like evangelical conservative communities are growing in this specific way, and the reasons behind it, and the reasons behind it being the reason why women are moving in one direction and men are moving in a different direction. So yeah, there's a lot here, and I know that we'll get into it, but I think that difference of knowing and hearing about who Gen Z is becoming and then seeing this sort of like counter narrative in the specific community was like, oh, let me dive in.
Yeah, I mean, for me, my experience of going to church is it was always predominantly women in church. Like every church I've ever been to has been predominantly women. And so to see this shift, it runs counter. I mean, from the early church onward, I would say, like it's been women. I'm like, this is like, you know,
for a long time.
Yeah.
One of the polls in the article mentions like in general, 2% more women in faith
Yeah.
communities.
And like in terms of just like the structural operational aspects of churches, I would say it's been mostly women. So this shift to me, it speaks to that there's other stuff going on, right? As Wesley was saying, like you see this split among men and women in Gen Z along these lines with respect to the ways in which women seem to be at odds with some of these traditional or with the majority of women, I should say, that are Gen Z are at odds with this traditional framework of what women's roles ought to be and this idea of complementarianism and all this stuff. So I'm really curious, Julia. I guess kind of like what came up for you, and because I mean,
So
I know
many
this is.
things.
You
I
know,
mean, I think first of all, mainstream Christianity, to me at least, seems to be moving further to the right, especially when it comes to patriarchal structures. So it makes sense to me as women are generally like moving more to the left there's another place in our society that you see this gender divide, this just like stark contrast in values, and it's not sustainable. I think it's all interconnected, right? Like the decline in birth rates, the decline in marriage and partnership. So many women globally are choosing to be single as opposed to being in relationship with men who are not suitable to not
Less than
suitable
ideal.
who
We
are
have standards now. Well done, ladies.
Yeah,
we have
absolutely.
standards. And I do think that, it's not lost on me that men are, there was another article that was released about in Psychology Today, short, about this epidemic of male loneliness. There are air quotes around that term, but about how unwilling men generally are to actually, heterosexual men, to do the work that needs to be done to be in relationship in the way that women would like to be in relationship, and so women would just rather not be bothered. And men are going to stop going to church if there aren't any women there. I can guarantee you that. If they don't go to the club, they're not going to keep going to church. So good luck.
I have something I want to share on that, but before I say anything, actually, Blair, what came up? Because I know this is. I think there's lots of ways to examine this article. There's multiple perspectives, and particularly along the lines of gender and sexuality, in light of what Julia just said. But I'm curious, kind of, what were some of your initial thoughts and takeaways from this article?
Yeah, I mean, this is like right in alignment with my research, right? So I study feminist evangelism. So if the church is not proclaiming a gospel that the end, right, if the end goal of salvation does not include the full humanization of women, then it's not the gospel. And for so many churches, even our
Preach.
mainline churches, even our progressive churches, the goal of the full humanization of women is not a part of their gospel. So why would women want to be part of that?
Yeah.
When they are living into a world where more and more they are demanding their own humanization, and they're getting it.
Yeah.
Right? Not everywhere. We're seeing a big pushback in all sorts of laws and cultures, but overwhelmingly, I think, yeah, we're seeing one of the points was 61% of Gen Z women identify as feminist.
Yeah.
So if you understand what it means to be feminist, which is celebrating and living into the full humanity of women, and then you go into a place where they proclaim progressive values and salvation and healing, but what you experience is the dehumanization of women, even subtly, well, then I wouldn't make time for that either.
Yeah.
So it makes sense to me. It makes sense to me.
And there's a difference in need of women in this time where men are claiming to be lonely for whatever reason. But women know how to build community out. Like we know how to be in community. We know how to meet each other's needs in ways that straight men especially, generally do not, right? Like there's a reason that there's not the same sort of epidemic of loneliness for women when women are just as unpartnered as men, right? Like, because we know how to be in community. And so it makes sense that men are going to churches to try to find each other. But like, again, good luck.
There's also a sort of like And the article pushes back against this idea that like they want like fire and brimstone theology. I think one of the quotes is like a little bit of God's
The
wrath.
wrath of
It's
God.
about
Yeah.
denying yourself. I guess that's happening in a lot of churches. But I do think that when you're talking about spirituality, it's a space of vulnerability and emotional engagement that a lot of men don't have an outlet
Mhm.
for in their lives. And so even if you are talking about fire and brimstone theology, like anger is an emotion. Like that's still an emotional engagement in a space where in a culture that says men are not supposed to have emotions. And so that also makes sense why men are finding community and meaning in church spaces that they're not finding in other parts of society.
Well, and also, as we all are starting to become more aware of these structures of patriarchy, to go to a place that it is so where they are still told that they are the authority, that they are God is created in their image. Like those things, I imagine, I don't know, but I imagine it feels great. Must be nice.
There's a couple things I want to say. The one I think is important right now in terms of uh, there's this child psychologist named by the name of Dr. Becky who has this famous phrase. She talks about how two things can be true, and I do think there is a truth that men are seeking relationship and meaning in ways that they haven't been able to find fulfillment, maybe through other activities like sports or whatever kind of clubs they used to go to, or academically or whatever, because of increased competition due to diversity. And
Mhm.
by diversity I mean all diversity, right? Like, your mediocrity is no longer going to be enough. Your
Mhm.
mediocrity and your whiteness, broadly speaking, isn't going
Yep.
to be enough. And to be clear too, the article really points to conservative men are more
Mhm.
drawn to religious spaces. So
Mhm. Mhm.
the reporter is interviewing. She's in Waco, Texas, for the story,
Yeah.
and this is a pretty conservative town with a pretty
Mhm.
conservative school, and so I think that makes sense from that particular perspective. And so I do want to be fair and say that I think there are. It is. I mean, it is hard to make friends as an adult. Like it just is. And if you have to put effort and work into that, and church I think is one of the spaces where you can find relationship.
Mhm.
And in an ideal world it's a relationship that can transform you and grow you to the good, right?
Mhm.
But like it could also be bad, right? You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? But like that doesn't mean that it's natural to want that. I think where it becomes dangerous, to Julia's point, is when you are seeking relationship and then you are drawn to this other community. You're drawn to a religious community that also affirms this embedded theology that of patriarchy that's in many aspects of Christian thought, where it's giving you a sense of identity, collective power, and organization, basically, and affiliation by saying, "Hey, you as a man are ordained for leadership. You are supposed to be in charge of things, and so you don't have to earn this. It's given to you by God." You don't have to work to earn somebody's trust. You have to work to earn the capacity to be in charge or anything. It's just supposed to be given to you. And so I think when you combine this desire for community with this bad theology, it can make sense that people can be drawn to that space.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that one of the things that struck me about the article was just like the way that the the yearn that these men are having for this type of specific conservative community. Like I'll quote from the article, like following Jesus is difficult, Mr. Ferrier said. It's about denying yourself and denying the lust of the flesh. He appreciates a church where leaders are frank about the intensity of self-sacrifice that he sees as a requirement for the Christian faith. Young men are attracted to hard truths, Mr. Ferrier said. And then he goes on to say, like, sometimes he added he wants to hear messages with a little wrath of God in them, which, whatever, disagree. But like this idea of like hard truths, um, acknowledging that like the world is changing and you need to step up to like keep up. You need to, your standards on who you are as a person and how you relate to other people, how you relate to women, how you relate to community. Like it's hard to be vulnerable. It's hard to be honest. It's hard to like come from a place of like vulnerability. So like these are hard things. And this is apparently what they're looking for, but what they're being given is something easy. So it's like for me, it's like they're saying one thing, but their actions are doing completely something else. And so I don't understand why the pastors themselves in this church aren't seeing this reality, why they aren't sort of acknowledging that the very thing that is attracting these men to their church is the very thing that is pushing women away. And
Mhm.
I don't know if the interview never went in that direction, but it's like it doesn't sound like they're wrestling with that reality, with that hard truth.
Whose truth are we
Mhm.
right? Not Dr. Becky, right? But like actually what is true here? Because one of the things I wanted to ask and find out more, and I don't have any evidence, is clicking through to the actual survey that sparked, I think, this article. There's no information about religious, like denominational affiliation, political affiliation, or race or
Yeah.
No
ethnicity.
Yeah.
demographic
Yeah.
So,
information.
so,
Yeah.
so frequently when this is a problem within the media, when we talk about Christians, what most journalists end up talking about is white evangelical Christianity,
Right.
Yep.
right? And so, is this true for a Black mainline church? Probably not. Is this
Mhm.
true for Filipino Catholics? Probably not,
Mhm.
right? Like,
Mhm.
so again, we are talking about a very particular and specific experience of a more conservative white evangelical man,
Yep.
and we are painting with a broad brush that this is the experience of all Christians across the United States, which it's not.
Absolutely.
And yeah, when these white, more conservative men who are being told in society, it's like you said, Dr. Carter, like it's not enough to just be mediocre and show up and be a white man. Like you actually have to be good at your job, or you have to be a kind human being, or you have to be a partner who actually contributes to the household. Like, and then they go to church and they're like, no, you just get it automatically. Well, heck yeah, I'd go to church then.
Yeah.
But that's not actually a truth,
It's not a. It's
right?
not a. It's not a hard truth. That's what
Definitely
Wesley
It's
not.
said.
certainly not. The
Like
hard
it's not a
truth
hard truth.
is
Yeah.
what you're being told. It's not enough to just show up and by the nature of your being be awarded things. And that actually, wait, hold on. That is a message of Christianity. What you are awarded is grace, right? But you are not awarded community and power and wealth and prestige and respect, which is what it sounds like these men are showing up
Yeah.
And
and wanting.
expecting. Right.
Yeah. To your point of the demographics of this specific community, like I looked up the 2020 census for Waco, and it's like 42% white, 31% Latinx, 19% Black. I looked at the leadership of this church, all white. So it's like they're not even reflecting the community they exist in. It's just the easiest way of existing with everyone who around you just looks exactly like you. So yeah, it's just like to your point. It's like these narratives are painted with a broad brush, and I think frustration at this narrative was one of the things that attracted me to this article. And I sound like this is weird,
Mm.
or this pattern continues to happen over and over again. And I mean, it's everywhere.
There's a part of me that wondered, and this is totally. I don't know. I'll just say it. How many of these men actually aren't straight? That's what I actually when I finished reading this. Like I was like, how many of these men are actually wrestling with their own sexuality, as we know is common in these spaces, right? And they are attracted to large gatherings of other men where they can become friends, and then that develops into and that's not a bad thing. I just want to name it as a possibility. Because statistically, I mean, you said about Gen Z being more open with their sex. That's across the board, male and
Mhm.
female, right? And so that's something also that came to my mind. So I just wanted to name that and be
Totally.
like, maybe there's other stuff going on too that, especially in a more conservative theological space, it's acceptable to have male friends in the Christian church, right? Right, and you can do all kinds of stuff, and we don't need to get into the stories. I'm sure all four of us have stories of stuff we know about happened on the DL that like, do people still say DL? I don't know. Is that maybe that's old? I'm like,
Sure.
I don't even know. Is that like, I'm like, that maybe just
Should
like,
have invited a Gen Z translator.
I know. I'm like, is that what the kids say? I don't even know. But anyway, those kinds of things have historically happened and continue to happen, And so, yeah, that was something I just want to name. Not that we have to necessarily discuss it, but I wondered that as a possibility based on this trend as well.
Well, and yes, and on top of that, just the root of so much homophobia is toxic masculinity, right? Like so much of it is like
Yes.
all wrapped up together. And so it absolutely makes sense to me that even if even of course there are absolutely some of these men who are going because they like to be around the boys, right? Um but also that are there intentionally, like I mean still trying to avoid it and dodge it and hide it. It's definitely probably a health, I would assume it's a healthy dose of both. Both things can be true. Thank you, Dr. Becky.
Absolutely. I did my undergrad in Iowa. I was going to a Reformed church. It was a very conservative area. And some of the same sort of like language perspectives are still happening. And that for me seems so wild because it's been over 10 years since I was in that space. And to like see very little sort of movement, sort of more of a regression. It was also just surprising. Obviously, probably feels like a duh moment, but like I was also struck by it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a part of me that's just recognizing that I think I want to get back to Blair's point actually that you said earlier, because to me this is I think points to the problem, and I'm wondering what you all three think the solution might be with respect to progressive churches like ours or progressive churches in general to actually meet this need for young, if it can meet this need for young men and for young women in general, but if more men are seeking spirituality, right? So the quote, Blair, that you had, or the statistic, Blair, you had talked about, was this is 61. This is from the poll that the article was premised on, which is
Yeah,
by this
from the
organization called the
Survey
Survey of
Center
America.
on American Life.
Yeah, so it says 61% of Gen Z women identify as feminist, far greater than women from previous generations. Younger women are more concerned about the unequal treatment of women in American society and are more suspicious of institutions that uphold traditional social arrangements. In a poll we conducted, nearly two-thirds, or 65% of young women, said they do not believe that churches treat men and women equally. And so basically they're saying, like, why am I going to come to this space if, like you said, they're not arguing for the full humanization of of everyone? And ultimately, like when I think about feminism, I think about Bell Hooks and her amazing book Feminism for Everybody. And she's like, feminism means you're against sexism. That's
Mhm.
it. That's
Yep.
for that's for men and women. That's good for
Mhm.
Yeah.
everybody. It's
Mhm.
not just good for women, it's good for everybody. So it's not anti-male, it's anti-oppression. And
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
should be good, you know? And so for me, it is about some churches' reluctance to preach a gospel, not a full humanity, a full humanization of liberation that is inclusive of all people, rather than preaching a gospel of, as I would say, equality with oppressors, right? Like you're fighting for
Mhm.
equality with the oppressor rather than liberation from oppression. And so, Blair, I'm curious, based on I mean, actually, like you said, this is really kind of your specific, more generally your specific area of research. What do you think, or is there something progressive churches can do to meet this need with respect to either men or women, right? Like, in terms of the kind of spiritual gap that we're seeing in this article.
Yeah, I think, yeah, Dr. Becky is really giving us a guideline here that it's both and, right? That it is both true that men need spaces of spiritual and emotional engagement and vulnerability. They need places where it is okay to be affectionate with other men. So, regardless of who they are sexually attracted to, like the loneliness epidemic is also tied to men feeling as if they are not allowed to show affection with one another, and that means that male friendships are less likely to have physical touch, which we know we need in humanity. Like as humans, we need to be touched and touch. Male friendships are less likely to go into emotional spaces, which we also need. And so, yeah, I think progressive churches can be a space where men are invited to also be fully human and have a range of emotions and have share affection with one another. And at the same time, be a space where women are affirmed and supported and where patriarchy is explicitly denounced. And I'll say to your credit, Dr. Carter, that from your preaching, my husband and I have had great conversations about patriarchy and theology, and conversations about our own marriage from some of the questions of challenging, reading womanist scholars as a basis for how we're thinking about scripture and how we are engaging as a community. And so from the perspective, you think you lose Dolores Williams a few weeks ago, and from the perspective of the intersectional experience of a Black woman and what that oppression looks like and feels like, that like opened up new avenues of conversation for us about our relationship with one another. And we have a very egalitarian marriage. Like, my husband is a feminist. Like, this is, he's already in that space. But when you're actually bringing questions about patriarchy into the pulpit, then we're gonna talk about it. We're not gonna assume that everyone in this room is already feminist, and if they name themselves a feminist, that they're behaving like it, right? Because that there's also a poll in here where it's like nearly 2/3 of Gen Z women say churches do not treat men and women equally, right? 60%. I would say that of the United Methodist Church, and we've had an ordination of women since the 1950s. That's a story. We had it before, we lost it, and we got it back. But like, we are supposedly an egalitarian, feminist, inclusive, LGBTQ inclusive, diverse church community. And I myself, as a female pastor, have experienced massively inappropriate expressions of misogyny from parishioners and from fellow clergy. So I love the church, and I still think the church does not treat men and women equally.
I mean, even our ordination process.
Yeah, yeah.
I
The
mean,
ordination process.
even our ordination process, we talked
So
about this because we went through it at the same time. It was not functionally set up, and that's we need to say more about that because I like to keep my ordination credential. Let's just say some changes needed to be made, and they were made, in part because we complained and we were like, this is not right.
Yeah.
And so, to their credit, they did make some changes. But anywho, again, I like to stay Reverend Dr. Carter. So I'll turn it over to Julia Wesley if y'all have any other thoughts about like what we should be, because my thing is, I feel like I'm always thinking like, how can, and again, it is the pastoral influence in me. It's like, is there a way for these men to, like you said, Blair, to find community, to be like, oh, you can have community, you can have intimacy, you can have this other stuff, and also heal from the trauma inflicted upon you? It makes you feel like you need to dehumanize women to feel more like a man,
absolutely.
like that's not
For
it.
men too. That is also part of the liberation.
Yeah.
I also think I was thinking about this last night when I couldn't fall asleep about like what radicalized me. And I really think that in the institution of the church should reflect on itself as the thing that is radicalizing these women. Like
Okay, say more. Keep going.
How am I who I am, right? And it's because I have personally been victimized by Regina George. Like, I have personally been victimized. I have felt the boot of oppression on my neck. I have felt poverty. I have lived through it. I am Black, and I have personally experienced racism. I've personally experienced misogyny. I have experienced misogynoir, the intersection of both. I've experienced it in my church. I've experienced it in the world. And that has radicalized me. That's why I am the way that I am. And it helps me to understand why so many straight white men aren't, right? Like, why would they be? But I think that the church, generally, the Big C church, has to start considering what it is doing to turn women away. And not just turn them away, but to radicalize them. Like, I would assume that part of the reason that women consider themselves to be feminists, part of the reason that they consider the value of their own humanity, is because they go into places where it is explicitly denied. So that's what I was thinking about at 3 a.m. Yeah. I hope you guys were sleeping well.
I was.
Well, and also what's interesting in these stats, right, Julia, is that it's the number is not how many young men are becoming Christians. It's how many young women are leaving the church.
Mm.
The actual statistic is that women are leaving the church during
Correct.
Gen Z more quickly than men are.
And the idea that it is because of something that the church is doing. Like, you are not, like, people are leaving because you are radicalizing them.
Yep.
You, exactly like you said earlier, like, these men are making women not want to engage with them, right?
And they're
Like,
not examining it either.
they're not examining it, but that's has to do with the fact that the church is telling everyone, the church is telling both men and women that they don't need to examine it, that they have the God-given authority, that they are the lead, like, all of this boo-boo. And the men are lapping it up and the women are being radicalized in the opposite direction. Like, the church is contributing to it, I think.
So I actually I wanted to. I think that's 100% accurate. There's this video that Union Theological Seminary put together, which features Kelly Brown Douglas, just extremely well known Black womanist scholar, and Emily Towns, another Black ethicist, extremely well known now at Boston University. Actually, Blair was at Vanderbilt, was a dean at Vanderbilt for a long time, and they're talking about their time at Union and how they grew. And what Kelly says is that she went to Union because she wanted to work with James Cone because of her experience of racism growing up and thinking critically about what it meant to be Black. And James would push her to think about how gender mattered in that conversation. But she said what radicalized her was the Black men on campus and how they tried to say, you're a woman, you can't preach, you can't stand from the pulpit, you can't do
Mm.
this, you can't do that. And she was like, that radicalized me. She was like, I was never, so she was more, she wouldn't say she was a moderate before she got there, but she's like, it's the other Christian men
Mm.
that radicalized her. And I was like, dang, that is, and she is brilliant. I mean, like, brilliant, has had an amazing career. It just speaks to exactly what you said, Julie, in terms of how the church asks itself the wrong question. Even Blair, how you said how they're phrasing the stats.
Mhm.
It's like,
Mhm.
oh, they're talking about women leaving, really, and not saying there's an explosion of men coming. It could be the same amount of men that have been coming, right? It's that women
Right.
are leaving, and so even when you frame it it's framed in a patriarchal way. Actually, when you think about it, like this whole article,
Yup.
oh man, that's messed up.
Yep. Yep.
It's
I
almost
like
like they're
had a
swimming in.
realization as we're talking about it. I'm like, oh
Yeah.
man.
Well, and I think that that's what makes, we're talking about hard truths, right? And I think what
Yeah.
makes hard truths different in the progressive church versus the conservative church is the conservative church is trying to find hard truths that help them arrive at comfort. And the
Mm.
progressive church, in its best moments, is asking, where are we still growing? Because there is no, until we have all arrived, none of us have arrived. And so, where is there still hurt? And where is there still space to learn
Mhm.
and grow and challenge and push? And that's been my experience of the progressive church. And that's why I'm still Christian, right? That's why I can have experiences of misogyny laid upon me by my brethren in Christ and still say, but I love you enough not to leave you behind. Like, I believe in a God that can transform that moment for you and can transform me into a person who helps you get there, right? So that to me is what really the progressive church can do in this moment, is like recognize and name and make space that we are not fully arrived until we have all arrived, and there is always more room to grow and heal and change and learn from one another.
No, I think that's great. I think that really explains at its best what we're trying to do, or what we ought to be trying to do in church in general, particularly a progressive church, to respond to this need for community, and also this way in which you find, broadly speaking, women who still identify as spiritual but not religious, because statistically they still fit in that broad swath, but not finding a place to express their spirituality where they can be seen as full human beings. And I
Yeah.
think it's probably not a surprise why the congregation, at the Loft is, I know it's predominantly women, and that makes a lot of sense, as we're having that, and the younger people that are coming tend to be like the young adults group is mostly women, right? Like it's mostly women. So yeah, Blair, I think that's yeah. As I don't know, hopefully that's your dissertation or that's some aspect of your dissertation. We can talk about that later on
Pieces of it. It's pieces of it.
another episode.
I'd have to write it before
yeah.
anyone can read it, but
Well, well, that's that. See, the thing is, we're gonna do an episode on it, and that's gonna prompt you and encourage you to write it. So, 100%, we're doing an episode on Blair's dissertation, like 100%.
I already can't wait.
Blair didn't know that. I just told her now. So
There's a deadline.
You're gonna have to like and subscribe because it's gonna be a while from now.
Stay with us. Stay with us.
We're just gonna do it as it develops. That's all it is. Just a theoretical framework, and then as it develops. I want to, before we wrap up, to have a conversation that I think is tied to this issue of why women are leaving the church and why some men are gravitating towards conservative theologies. And to me, I see this connecting to the story of Mark Robinson, the lieutenant governor of North Carolina, a black man who's running for governor because he has preached this kind of conservative, patriarchal, racist message, even though he's black, that is designed to appeal to those base desires and base embedded theologies that are deeply problematic in Christianity as a tool and mechanism to propel himself to power in the Republican Party. Now, for those of you who aren't following the story, the CNN recently uncovered some data, if you will. It says a series of inflammatory comments allegedly made by Robinson on a pornography website message board over a decade ago. The postings range from support for reinstating slavery to calling himself a black Nazi.
Absolutely wild. Absolutely wild.
There is a lot there.
So icky. He's very, very yucky. He's the
I
big
don't
ick.
understand it.
Well, the thing that I find interesting is this is a black man, right? Completely unvetted. And because the grand old party has been so desperate to find black people who are willing to affirm the worst things about their party, they will elevate quite literally the worst amongst humanity if they are black and they say that they're a Republican. This is not the first, I did not think that there could be a worse candidate running for office anywhere in this nation than Herschel Walker. And yet, here we are. Because this man is somehow even worse. It's wild. It's truly wild. It's crazy.
It is crazy. I think that it does assuage a lot of white guilt if you have a black person that says black people are suffering because of all the racist reasons why you assume they're suffering. You're like, oh, it's because they're lazy, they want to work hard.
I'm not racist. I voted for the black guy.
Yeah. But the fact that he says, see, and this is the thing. That's one level of like internalized racism, right? To just get there and perform. It's a whole.
I would own a few. I want them to bring slavery back so I could own a few, sir.
See, that's an exponential level of internalized racism. I have not
the
seen.
idea that you assume that you would be on the buying end in general is like
delusional.
So crazy.
Oh God, that is a fair point. The idea, that is a fair point. I think that, and again, this idea that, I mean, he said before, like, he thinks some people, with respect to calling himself a Nazi, the argument is that he essentially has been okay with the genocide of certain groups of people, for people dying for certain causes. He just believes that he believes in a patriarchal God of wrath and punishment, right? And that this is a part of God's plan, quote unquote, to punish these people.
Didn't he have a comment where he was like, some people need to get shot? Wasn't this the same person?
Yeah, it's the same guy. Yeah, he was preaching, actually. That's what I'm saying. He's preaching.
He was a pastor? This man was a pastor?
I don't know if he is
Where?
a I don't know if he is a pastor or he just was like at
But
church with
someone let him in the
preaching.
poll. This is why.
Yeah.
See, you remember when we asked why is the church dying?
Yeah. Mediocrity. Being
Not
loud in the
this is
pulpit.
not mediocrity. This
Yeah.
is below mediocrity.
This is just sad. It's sad. And now, I mean, and this is a person who was endorsed by, former President Donald Trump. Like Donald Trump called him better than Martin Luther King. He said literally, he's like Martin Luther King times two.
Martin Luther
Martin Luther
King on
King on
steroids.
steroids. And so it's like,
When
um,
Robinson called MLK a commie,
yeah,
and then an
Oh my-
extra bad word after that.
yeah.
He said terrible things about Martin Luther King.
Oh no, he hates Martin Luther King. And
Of
the
course
thing
he
is,
does.
and so I guess to get at looking at it from a perspective of how can someone get like this, right? Is always what my mind is like, and I do think some of this is money. I think there's a way in which because the Republican Party is willing to invest, like Julia said, in a black person who's willing to make this claim. You're going to be financially secure if you're willing to do this. But his willingness to go as far as he has gone really speaks to this kind of internalized idea about what it means to be human that's so steeped in whiteness. It's a deep trauma of inability to love yourself, right? It's just like way in which you see yourself fundamentally as flawed and broken and needing some kind of healing that can only take place if you do the things that white people expect you to do and fit into their framework of what it means to be human. And this is something that I think so many black people struggle with, right? I mean, and like not to the degree in which he does, but to a degree to which you have to you're always wrestling with how much you want to perform, how much you want to do to soothe white people. And you hope at its best you're able to do the work to heal, to love yourself, to find and see yourself as a beloved child of God, and to grow from that. But at its worst, you hit someone like him who decides to double down and capitalize on it. And really, I mean, that's really what it is the economic capitalization on it. And it is, I mean, it, like on one level, I look at it, I'm like, I don't understand it. Another level, I look at it, I'm just like, I genuinely feel, it's just like, man, like, look at what racism does to people.
It's embarrassing.
That's what I feel like. I'm like, look at what
Mhm.
it does, man. Like, look
Mhm.
at what it does. Like, it's crazy. Like, it is crazy.
Well, I think the best example of that, and when I say best, I mean worst, but like Clarence Thomas, right?
Most obvious
The
example.
most obvious example, he has made a fortune. He has
Absolutely.
sold his soul over and over. We all know about it. He doesn't care. He has no shame. And he continues to reap the fiscal rewards. He will say, all I wanted was to be rich. Like, and yet he's still not as deplorable as this man. So, like, if the best you can be on this trajectory is Clarence Thomas, what is confusing to me is like, that's the goal, right? That's the best you can be. Why would you even step foot down that dark path? Because I'm looking at where Clarence Thomas is sitting and I'm like, yikes, that's embarrassing. I'm embarrassed for you. Like what radicalizes these people? That's what I want to know. I know what's radicalized me, but like what radicalized Clarence Thomas and what is this man's name? Mark
Mark
Robinson.
Robinson.
What radicalized them? Because I'm over here. I'm sure they have more in common. Their upbringings have more in common with me than any of the people that they are in politics with and, dancing around with. And yet they're all the way over there. And here I am.
I do want to get at a little bit before we wrap up his religion, the way he's using religion to make his case. And there's an article in the Assembly called and we'll put all these articles we're talking about in the show notes, The Gospel According to Mark Robinson. And basically it talks about how again, he's adopted a kind of the same kind of, again, theology that's rooted in white Christian nationalism, where it's deeply patriarchal, tied to like a militaristic vision of God and Jesus. And they argue that the home should be properly ordered in that particular way, right? So they want to like keep America Christian, keep American families strong, keep America safe. Like these are the kinds of things that they believe in, and that can only be maintained from their perspective through patriarchy, right? Like it is particularly a way where they believe that God has assigned men these particular kind of roles. And so it's a way for them to galvanize not only support for themselves and security in themselves, but also a way to kind of to really misuse and misquote the Bible, which he does all the time, like just all the time. Like he's taking scripture not even out of context. I mean, he's just like mixing up verses. Like he has a terrible theology, but he knows how to weaponize it in a way to tell people what he thinks they want to hear, which clearly some people want to hear, so that they follow him. And yeah, so I mean, there's a sermon where he talks about like, so he's given this quote. He says, he's like, when you're facing adversity, he's like, my God tells me that when I face adversity, that number one, I am to stand up like a man, man. And then I don't really remember. I mean, I don't know. I just went to school for a long time and learned how to read the Bible, a couple different language. I just don't really remember that reading. Blair, do you remember reading that when you went to seminary?
Nope. Nope.
Okay. I don't remember that. So yeah, I think that's the part that's scary to me. Like so I see this tied to the previous conversation is like, these are the kinds of men that these young men are listening to. That's what concerns me.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm like, how do we literally save them from themselves? Like, like that is because the consequence of them going down that road is terrible for all of us. Like it just is legitimately terrible for all of us. So anywho, there's something you're going to say, Blair?
I love to drop one more resource because you mentioned the fabulous Reverend Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas earlier, and she takes to task the history of the interweaving of patriarchy and white Christian nationalism and the ways in which those are like deeply entwined in the history of American Christianity in Stand Your Ground, Black Bodies and the Justice of God. And so that is just it's like a really beautiful text. And the first part tells that story. Like it lays out, how did we get here? Like what were we so afraid of, and what was most valued? And it was, white masculinity. And that's what informed so much of American Christianity and American politics. And she just tells the story really beautifully and succinctly in that book. And then the second half of the text is, then how do we undo it? Right?
Yeah.
How do we bring justice to Black bodies? And she's, also bringing in a feminist perspective and pushing back on patriarchy. It's just it's a beautiful text. So if we're thinking about like, how do we heal? Understanding what the story actually is, I think, is a big help in that. And so I would recommend that to people of all backgrounds. She
I
just
think
did a really amazing job laying it out.
honestly, after talking about it, I need to just see if she might be on the podcast. Emily Townsend Tracy West were on a panel review of my book, and Dr. Douglas gave this lecture, the keynote lecture, that was after, like before my book presentation, and came to the conversation. So like I'm like adjacently familiar with these like ridiculously brilliant, like well-known, super famous scholars, but their work is it's literally set a trajectory forth for theology and ethics. Like just in the last 10 years, probably some among the most well-known and most cited scholars are Black women. And that's just says a lot in terms of just the kind of work that they've been able to do, because how hard, like they could not be mediocre to get where they are. Like they had to be excellent. They had to be great. And so, I think that's an excellent resource to point to how to undo the trauma that we've seen and how we might move forward. So Again, thank you all for being here. It was great having this conversation, and thank you all for joining us for the Progressive Christians podcast. If you would like to connect with us and be a part of the conversation and everything we're doing, you can visit us, or you can find us, I should say, on Instagram at the Progressive Christians, and we're on TikTok and Instagram. As you go, I was like trying to figure it out. Like, what are we on? We're on the things. We're on the things that you young people are supposed to. You Gen Zers. We're on the things we think you're on.
Gen Z is going to pile on. But bring it on, guys. Tell us what you think.
Exactly. Tell us by rating, reviewing. Only give us good reviews. Only give us 5 stars. They'll give us 4 stars. And so like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And we'll see y'all next week. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.